It was just past 2 a.m. when the wind screamed like a freight train tearing across the Texas plains. The storm had been rolling in for hours, but Margaret Dawson wasn't the kind of woman who flinched at thunder. At 93 years old, she'd lived through dust storms, tornadoes, and wars, both on land and in her own home. But this night felt different. The rain came sideways, smacking hard against the farmhouse windows, like nature itself was trying to get in. Maggie stood in her kitchen, hands trembling slightly as she poured herself a cup of tea. Her dog, Buddy, a mixed-breed mutt who barely had the energy to bark anymore, let out a low growl from under the table. Then came the knock. Not the wind, not a branch, a knock. 3 hard raps. Maggie froze, fingers tight around the teacup. No one came out here at this hour. No one came out here at all. She moved to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek through. Headlights cut across the dark, slicing the rain like knives. A truck, big, black, too new, too shiny for this back-road town. Second knock, louder this time. Buddy growled again, deeper. Maggie didn't bother grabbing her phone. Cell service was useless out here, and the landline had been out since the wind picked up. Instead, she stepped into the hallway, opened a drawer, and pulled out her late husband's shotgun. It hadn't been fired in years, but it was clean. Ready. She cracked the door open 2 inches. Rain shot in like bullets. A man stood there, tall, broad shoulders under a wet leather jacket, dark eyes that didn't blink against the wind. "Mrs. Dawson." His voice was flat, calm, too calm. "Who's asking?" "We're here about the land." "Just want to have a word." Maggie narrowed her eyes. "At 2 in the morning?" Behind him, 2 more men stepped into view. No badges, no neighborly concern, just that same dead-eyed stare. "We're making an offer," the first man said, stepping forward. His boot crossed the threshold. Maggie raised the shotgun a fraction. "I don't sell to men who don't knock like gentlemen. Get off my porch." The man paused, smiled. "You might want to rethink that, ma'am. Things around here are about to get complicated." "Not for me," she said, her voice steel. "Now move." For a long moment it was just the storm. Then, without another word, the men turned and walked back to the truck. Tires spun mud as they tore off down the drive, disappearing into the sheets of rain. Maggie didn't breathe until the headlights were gone. She shut the door, locked it. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She sat down, hands trembling now for real, and reached for the one photo she kept above the fireplace. Her grandson, Jack Dawson. The only one she had left. The only one who could fight. Fire with fire. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The storm had passed by morning, but the tension hung heavier than the clouds ever did. Maggie Dawson sat in her faded armchair, near the fireplace, a hand-knitted quilt draped over her knees, steam rising from the second cup of tea she'd brewed since sunrise. Her fingers grazed the photo in her lap. A young boy, maybe 7, wearing a cowboy hat too big for his head, sitting on a fence with a toothy grin. Jack. God. It felt like a lifetime ago. She leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the memories come like tumbleweeds rolling across a long-forgotten prairie. In 1953, she'd been just 21 when she and her husband, Earl, bought the farm with their last few dollars and a truck that broke down halfway there. They'd slept on the floor the first 3 nights, eaten canned beans, and used the stars for a ceiling fan, but they had land, real land, and dreams. Then came the children, just one, William, stubborn as a mule, smart as a whip, grew up feeding chickens and riding bareback by 6, went off to college, then the Marines, and eventually came home to help run things after Earl died of a heart attack in the barn one July morning. She remembered that day like it was stitched into her bones. Earl's boots were still by the door. Maggie buried her grief in routine, milking at dawn, baking at noon, walking the perimeter each evening like he used to. The land gave her purpose. It still did. Then the accident. It was only supposed to be a weekend fishing trip. William and his wife never came back. A drunk driver took their lives in one blow, leaving a 4-year-old Jack without parents. She'd never seen a child cry like that before. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, silent, like the soul had been hollowed out. So Maggie raised him. She taught him how to plant seeds, change tires, and clean a rifle. She read to him from the Bible and from Louis L'Amour. Novels. She showed him how to stand up straight even when life tried to bend you sideways. But when he turned 18, he left. Didn't even say goodbye, just a note on the counter and a pair of muddy boots left by the door. I need to know what I'm made of. Don't wait up. Jack. She hadn't seen him since. A soft knock broke her out of the haze, not on the door this time, but the window. Buddy whined softly. Mailman, just an envelope this time. No return address. Maggie stepped out to grab it, her boots crunching on wet gravel. When she opened it, a single sheet of paper fluttered in her hand. It read, 1 week, then we take it. No. Signature. No explanation, just a threat. Maggie stood there in the quiet, the breeze playing with the corner of the paper. She looked out over her fields, the rows of hay, the oak tree where Jack used to climb, the rusted tractor that hadn't run in years. She wasn't ready to lose this, not to strangers, not to thieves, not after everything this land had already taken from her. She went back inside and sat down with the photo of Jack again. His face had grown blurry in her memory, but those eyes, deep, determined, she'd never forget them. With a breath that rattled like dry leaves, she whispered to the picture, I hope you're still out there, Jack, because I need you now. And I don't know if I can do this alone. The air in Wyoming was cold and dry, thin enough to make your lungs burn a little when you breathed too deep. Jack Dawson liked it that way. It kept the world at arm's length. He sat shirtless on the porch of a one-bedroom cabin he'd built himself 2 summers back. A bottle of bourbon sat half empty by his bare feet. Next to it, a silver coin spun slowly on the wood, flipping. Over again and again, heads, tails, heads, make a call, he muttered. The coin clattered to a stop, tails, of course. He leaned back and rubbed his hand over his close-shaved head. His knuckles were still scarred from a bar fight 3 weeks ago. Guy had grabbed a waitress too rough. Jack handled it, like he always did, but he didn't feel like a hero. He never did anymore. He hadn't worn the uniform in over a year, but it still lived in his skin, etched into the calluses, the nightmares, the silence. SEAL Team 6. It sounded like something out of a movie, but to Jack, it was just blood, sweat, and a mission that went sideways in Kandahar. He'd made it out. His team didn't. That kind of loss doesn't come with closure. It just sits with you, eats with you, sleeps next to you like an old dog you can't get rid of. His phone buzzed once on the wooden table beside him. Unknown caller. He stared at it. Let. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then on the 4th he picked it up. Yeah, Mr. Dawson. A shaky voice. Old female. This is Jack. My name is Ethel Collins. I live 2 doors down from your grandmother. Jack straightened. Up, that name hadn't been spoken to him in years. His heart kicked once, hard. Maggie? He asked, tension rising in his throat. She's okay for now, but she had visitors last night. Jack's mind clicked into tactical mode. What kind of visitors? Men. Big ones. Not from around here. One of them nearly busted my gate just turning around, said something about her land. And this morning I saw Maggie out there with her shotgun. Jack. She looked scared. Scared? That was all Jack needed to hear. She doesn't scare easy, he said, already on his feet. You sure? I've known her 30 years. Never seen her like this. Jack exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the horizon as if an answer might appear in the mountains. Thank you, Ethel. I'll be there by morning. He hung up, walked inside and stared at himself in the cracked bathroom mirror. The man who looked back wasn't the boy Maggie raised. This guy had a beard, eyes like bruises, and a back hunched from too many hits and too many regrets. But deep, down under all that, somewhere buried, was the same kid who used to sit on his grandma's lap and eat peach cobbler like it was a religious experience. He opened his closet, pulled down a locked metal case and flipped it open. A Sig Sauer P226, a folding knife, 3 MREs, and a U.S. Navy Trident patch worn at the edges, still smelling faintly of oil and sand. He tucked the patch into his jacket pocket, not as a badge, as a A reminder. He packed only what he needed, tossed his duffel in the truck and hit the road without another word. The closer he got to Texas, the more the land changed, flattening, stretching out, becoming something older. Something heavier, like home. And in the rearview mirror the ghosts faded into the distance. The Texas sun was setting when Jack Dawson turned off the highway and onto the long, winding dirt road that led to Dawson Farm. He rolled down the window and let the dry wind hit his face. It smelled like dust, cattle, and memories, the kind of smell that never really leaves your bones, no matter how far you run. The farmhouse hadn't changed. Same white paint peeling off in patches, same crooked fence line and stubborn oak tree out front. Even the weather vane on the barn was still spinning, half-broken, pointing east like it always had, as if trying to guide him home all this time. For, very second, he wasn't a SEAL or a survivor, or a man on the edge of collapse. He was just Jack, grandson of Maggie Dawson. She was on the porch, shotgun resting across her lap like an extension of her spine. Her eyes locked onto him the second the high truck came into view. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just stared. Jack killed the engine and stepped out. The silence between them was louder than the cicadas humming in the distance. He took a few steps toward the house. Maggie didn't move. Finally he said, "Hey, Grandma." She stood slowly, leaning on the shotgun like it was a cane. Her eyes softened just a little. "Well, I'll be damned." Jack smiled, faint and crooked, still standing. "So's the house," she said. "Didn't expect to see you again, not after you disappeared like some kind of tumbleweed in a storm." He nodded. "Took it. He deserved it. I know. Don't say sorry yet," she cut in. "I need to know if you came here out of guilt or if you came here to fight." Jack blinked. That was so her. "I came here because someone threatened you. That makes it my problem." She studied him for a beat, then finally stepped forward and pulled him into the kind of hug that breaks something loose inside a man. He hugged her back, harder than he meant to. Inside the house, things were exactly as he remembered. The same. Ticking clock, same lace curtains, even the same smell of lemon and old paper. But something had shifted. The warmth was still there, sure, but now it was wrapped in tension. Jack scanned the place automatically. Windows locked, curtains drawn, deadbolts secure. Years of training clicked in without thought. "Tell me what happened," he said as they sat at the kitchen table, a fresh pot of coffee brewing. She didn't sugarcoat it. The three men. The knock, the threat, the note in the mailbox. "They didn't just want to buy it," she said. "They wanted to scare me off it." "Who are they?" "Don't know, but they're local or pretending to be, real professional-like, but not from the government, not neighbors. I think they've been watching for a while." Jack's jaw tightened. He pulled out a notepad and jotted a few things down, flipping into full recon mode. "Has anyone else been out here lately?" "Ethel came by, that's it. The sheriff stopped showing up 2 years ago unless there's a body involved." Jack smirked. "Sounds about right." He stood and walked the perimeter after dinner, checking the property line, noting the cameras. She'd tried to set up, cheap ones easy to disable. "You need better gear," he muttered. Maggie followed him with a flashlight. "And you need to stop talking like I haven't held off rattlesnakes, trespassers, and the IRS for 90 years. Jack looked back at her. "You hired any help lately?" "Nope." "Any neighbors nosing around too much?" "Only that fool. Bobby McLean. Thinks he's charming, has the IQ of a goat." Jack chuckled. "Same Maggie." But the laughter faded when he spotted tire tracks, fresh, wide, deep. Not from a regular truck, military-grade off-road. Whoever came by last night, they weren't amateurs. Later that night, Jack sat on the porch, cleaning his sidearm under the stars, while Maggie rocked quietly next to him. "You know," she said, "your grandpa built this porch with his bare hands, every board, every nail. Said if you build something with your own 2 hands, you'll never let anyone take it from you." Jack nodded, eyes on the stars. "That's what I'm counting on," he said, a long pause. Then Maggie added, "I never stopped missing you, Jack, even when I was mad." "I know," he whispered. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. The night was quiet, too quiet. Jack sat in the darkened living room, boots on, eyes fixed out the front window. The air was heavy, still. No wind, no bugs. Even the crickets seemed to be holding their breath. He checked the time, 2:04 a.m. Same hour they'd shown up before. Buddy, the old mutt, stirred at his feet, letting out a low growl. Jack reached down, resting a calming hand on the dog's back. "Good boy," he whispered. Out beyond the fence line, headlights flickered once in the distance, then vanished. Jack's grip on the pistol tightened. He'd rigged the east side with a tripwire just in case. Low-tech but effective. Maggie thought he was paranoid. Jack called it prepared. Then snap, not loud but distinct. Someone tripped the line. He was up in seconds, moving silent as smoke through the back door, knife on, his belt, cig drawn and ready. Maggie stayed inside, locked in with Buddy and a cordless phone in hand, just like they'd planned. Jack moved through the dark like he was back in enemy territory, low, quick, controlled. He could hear them now, 2 voices, male, young, laughing too loud for people doing something illegal, amateurs. No, cocky amateurs. He circled wide, using the tall grass as cover. They were near the barn, one holding a can of gasoline, the other fidgeting with a lighter. Just light the edge. We don't burn the place down, just enough to make her sweat. She already called someone, the second guy said. What if he's here? The first one snorted. A 93-year-old and some washed-up vet? Please. Jack stepped out of the shadows, gun raised, voice sharp like a blade. Wrong answer. Both froze. The guy with the gas dropped the can, hands going up. The other fumbled with the lighter. Jack fired a single round just inches from his foot. Next one's not a warning. They dropped everything. Okay. We didn't mean anything, just a message. We were just paid to... Who paid you? The first one looked like he was about to cry. Man named Briggs. Clayton Briggs. From Lubbock. Said she owed him. Said no cops. Jack narrowed his eyes. Briggs. He knew that name. A land developer with a dirty reputation and dirtier money. Known for pushing out older property owners across Texas, turning land into oil pads and fracked wastelands. You tell Briggs, Jack said, stepping closer. He just picked a fight with the wrong damn family. They nodded so fast their necks might have snapped. Jack tied them up and left them for the sheriff, who conveniently wouldn't arrive for 3 more hours. By the time the sun rose, the barn was safe, the fire never lit, and the local radio buzzed with early reports of trespassers apprehended by local veteran. Maggie was quiet all morning. Then, as Jack came in from checking the fence line, she handed him a cup of coffee and said, "So, you gonna stay?" Jack looked at her. At the porch, at the land. He nodded once. "Yeah, I'm not done here." In town. Later that afternoon, an old friend pulled up beside him in the gas station lot, a Jeep. Dusty, familiar face behind the wheel. "Jack freaking Dawson?" The driver grinned. "What the hell are you doing back in Dirt Town, Texas?" Jack looked up, surprised. Rachel Stevens, the one girl he never kissed, the one he never forgot, and in her eyes Jack saw something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Rachel Stevens hadn't changed much, still had that sun-bleached hair pulled into a messy braid, still wore boots caked in dust and jeans that meant business. But there was something different behind her eyes now, something Jack recognized. Worry. The kind that doesn't come from just a bad day, more like a bad year. They sat across from each other in the corner booth at Penny's Diner, sipping coffee from chipped mugs, the smell of fried eggs and cigarette smoke hanging in the air like it always had. "So," Rachel said, folding her arms. "Back for a family visit or planning to start a war?" Jack smirked. "Little of both." Rachel gave a dry laugh. "You picked the right time. This town's rotting from the inside." Jack leaned in. "What do you know about a guy named Clayton Briggs?" Her smile vanished. She looked around, made sure no one was listening, then dropped her voice. "He's not just some developer, Jack. He's got ties. Money laundering, private security, even a few judges in his pocket. He's been buying up land across 3 counties. People sell or they disappear." Jack's jaw flexed. "Disappear?" Rachel nodded slowly. "You remember Henry Calloway? The rancher out near Bitter Creek? Big guy. Always smelled like tobacco. Yeah. He didn't sell. 2 months. Later, his barn caught fire. The insurance called it electrical. Town called it unlucky, but everyone knew." Jack let that sink in. And Maggie? She's sitting on one of the last big plots in the county, Rachel said. Flat water access and right above an untapped shale deposit. So that was it. Oil. Same story. Different town. Different target. But this time, they messed with the wrong family. Outside the diner, Rachel walked Jack to his truck. I'm sorry I never wrote back, she said. Jack shrugged. I never sent anything. She gave him a soft smile. Still, it's good to see you, even under this mess. You always been this brave? Only when I'm pissed off. They shared a moment, something quiet, electric, and unfinished. Then, she pulled a folder out of her glove box. I work at the county clerk's office. Briggs's company filed zoning requests last week. They're planning to annex Dawson Farm into an industrial district. Jack flipped through the papers. Legal documents, maps, pressure tactics, all backed by lawyers and a corrupt zoning board. So what do we do? She asked. Jack stared out across the horizon, his voice low. We stop them. That night, back at the farmhouse, Maggie was on the porch with Buddy, a glass of sweet tea in hand. Made some calls, she said, not looking up. Turns out Briggs's folks have been leaning on more than just me, Bobby McLean's niece. Got fired from the courthouse for asking too many questions. Jack handed her the folder from Rachel. It's worse than we thought. She flipped through the papers, eyes narrowing. So, war it is. Jack looked at her, proud, fierce. Yeah, he said, war it is. But just as they settled in for the night, headlights appeared at the far edge of the field. Jack was on his feet in seconds. One car, then another, then three more, black SUVs. Tinted windows, no plates. He turned to Maggie. Get inside, lock the door. She didn't argue this time. Jack grabbed his rifle and moved to the edge of the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon as the engines cut and doors opened. 5 men stepped out, all in black, all armed. This wasn't a message. This was a warning, and Jack Dawson was more than ready to send one back. The first SUV's headlights cut through the night like a spotlight. 5 men, armed, moving with a purpose. Jack could feel the tension tightening in his chest, the old instinct kicking in. His eyes scanned the figures as they stepped out of the black vehicles, surveying the land like they owned it. They don't, Maggie, had already ducked inside, bolting the door behind her. Buddy, the dog, had gone quiet, sensing the danger, his ears perked. Jack's pulse was steady as he crouched low behind a barrel near the corner of the porch, the rifle in his hands cold, but familiar. The men were spread out now, 2 by the first truck, 1 by the barn, 1 near the fence line. The 5th man, tall and broad, stepped forward, his hand resting on the sidearm tucked under his jacket. Leader. Jack's breath was slow and deliberate. He could hear the man's voice, but couldn't make out the words. They were too far for a clean shot. Instead, Jack focused on his hearing, on every creak of wood, every rustle of the dry grass beneath their boots. The men were closing in, talking low. Jack's eyes narrowed. They were here for a reason. Not just to threaten, but to intimidate, to take. He had to act fast. Leader took another step forward, a dark figure now only 50 yards away from the house. Jack's chance. He moved silently, crossing the porch, ducking low. His boots hit the ground with barely a whisper. Silent, calculating. A predator waiting to strike. The men were too confident, too used to walking through places like this without fear. Jack's training was built. For this, when you can't afford mistakes, every move is deliberate. The enemies were isolated, easy to pick apart. They weren't soldiers, just hired hands with guns. He raised his rifle just a few inches and took aim at the leader. No hesitation. Bang. The first shot hit the man in the shoulder, sending him crashing into the dirt. The rest of the men immediately took cover, reaching for their guns, but Jack had already moved, vanishing into the shadows like a ghost. 2 more shots rang out, silenced by the suppressor, each one finding its mark. One of the men dropped near the barn, the other slumping behind a tree. The remaining 2 men were panicking now. The one by the fence line drew his weapon, but wasn't quick enough. Jack's hand was already on the trigger again. Bang! The man went down with a grunt, his body crumpling into the dirt. Only one left. Jack could see him now. The last man, the one who'd been closest to the trucks, had backed up and was trying to reach for something in his jacket, probably a radio, or worse, a grenade, but Jack had anticipated that. He moved forward, closing the distance fast, taking a final shot to incapacitate him before he could make a move. Boom! The last man fell with a thud, his hand never reaching his weapon. Silence fell like a thick blanket. Jack stood still for a moment, letting the adrenaline bleed out. His heart was still pounding, but his hands were steady. He let the rifle hang by his side as he walked forward, making sure the area was clear. One by one, he checked each man's pulse. Dead, dead, dead. Alive. The leader, the big guy, was groaning, clutching his shoulder, trying to crawl toward the nearest SUV. Jack approached him, stepping on his hand before he could reach the door. "Stay down," Jack growled, the edge of his voice cold and hard. The man groaned again, eyes filled with fear. "You came to the wrong farm," Jack said, bending down to grab him by the collar. "Who sent you?" "Briggs." "It's all for Briggs. He's got a whole plan?" Jack pulled the man to his feet, dragging him toward the porch. "And what's the plan, huh? You gonna burn this place down? Or just scare an old lady to death?" The man spit blood onto the dirt. "You don't understand." "This land—" "I understand enough," Jack interrupted, pulling his sidearm from the holster and pressing it against the man's temple. "You tell Briggs I'm coming. I'll be waiting for him." The man's eyes widened in terror, but Jack didn't give him time to speak again. With one sharp motion, he knocked him unconscious, letting him collapse to the ground. Inside the house, Maggie was at the window, watching the scene unfold. Jack walked in, wiping the sweat from his brow, and said nothing. He just stood there for a second, catching his breath. Maggie stood up, her face unreadable. "Well," she said, breaking the silence, "looks like we've started something." Jack nodded, turning his back on her and walking toward the table. He was already planning his next move, already thinking about Briggs. He knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. In town, the sheriff would be getting the call soon. The deputies would show up, and it would look like another small-town incident. Local law enforcement trying to clean up the mess Jack had made. But the truth was, the sheriff and his deputies weren't ready for what Jack was about to bring down on them, and neither was Briggs. The sun had barely broken the horizon when Jack went to work. Inside the farmhouse, the silence of the morning was suffocating. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, the faint light from the window casting long shadows across her face. She hadn't said much since the fight last night, but Jack could feel the weight of her thoughts hanging in the air. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about the life they'd built, and the war that had now come knocking at their door. Jack didn't waste time. He headed straight for the old barn, the spot where Maggie had kept records from years past, old documents, receipts, anything. That might tell him more about Clayton Briggs's dealings. He had no illusions about the guy. Briggs was ruthless, and Jack knew that meant no one was safe. If he wanted to stop Briggs, he had to understand the full extent of his operation. Inside the barn, the shelves were lined with stacks of old files, some yellowed with age. Jack flipped through them, finding everything from tax documents to contracts with oil companies. But there was one document that caught his eye, an old land lease agreement between Maggie and an oil company, dated back almost 20 years. The terms were strange: disproportionate royalties, a handshake agreement, and something about future rights. Future rights. Jack could feel a fire building in his chest as he read the fine print. This wasn't just a piece of property. It was a gold mine, and someone had already made a claim on it. Briggs didn't want to buy the land, Jack muttered to himself. He's trying to steal it. Just then, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. Jack froze, his ears straining. More visitors? He grabbed the old hunting rifle from the shelf, slinging it over his shoulder as he crept toward the door. Who could it be? Outside, he saw the sheriff's cruiser parked at the edge of the property. Sheriff Wheeler, a grizzled man in his 50s, stepped out of the car. He looked tired, his boots kicking up dust as he walked toward the farmhouse. A deputy, younger and eager, followed him closely, scanning the area with suspicious eyes. Jack stayed hidden behind the barn, watching, waiting. "Jack Dawson." The sheriff's voice rang out, firm but not angry. "You out here, son?" Jack stepped into view, making sure to keep his rifle slung low, his expression neutral. "Sheriff," Jack greeted him. "What's going on?" The sheriff didn't waste time. "We got word from the town. Folks are talking. What happened last night?" Jack didn't flinch. "Nothing. Just taking out some trash." The sheriff raised an eyebrow, glancing at the two men lying unconscious in the dirt, still tied up and abandoned. "Doesn't look like nothing. We got a report, too. A lot of people saw you shooting. Now, I'm not here to make trouble. Jack, I'm just trying to understand what's going on." Jack met his gaze. "Sheriff, you know me. I'm here to protect what's mine." The sheriff nodded slowly, his eyes shifting toward the farmhouse. "I know you are, but this is bigger than a family squabble. Clayton Briggs is a serious man, and if he's got you on his radar, you're in deep." Jack didn't hesitate. "I'm in deep either way, Sheriff, and if you don't want to be, you need to start thinking about which side you're on." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. Jack could see the conflict in his eyes, but there was a flicker of something else there, too, something close to guilt. Finally, the sheriff sighed, glancing over his shoulder at the deputy. "Go wait in the cruiser, Randy. I need to have a word with Mr. Dawson." The deputy hesitated but obeyed, climbing back into the cruiser and shutting the door. The sheriff turned back to Jack, lowering his voice. "Listen," the sheriff said, leaning in closer. "Briggs, he's not just a businessman, he's got connections, way deeper than you or I could ever imagine. If you're going up against him, you better be ready for more than just a few men with guns." Jack nodded, the weight of the sheriff's words sinking in. "I'm ready," he said. "What do you know?" The sheriff glanced around before speaking again, as if making sure no one was listening. "There's been talk in town. A few folks have disappeared. Not just ranchers, teachers, clerks, people who were asking too many questions about what Briggs is doing. They're vanishing, Jack, and no one's talking about it. You think this is about land? It's bigger than that. This is about control, power." Jack could feel the fire inside him burning hotter now, a mix of anger and purpose. "You saying you're going to let him take over this town?" The sheriff's face tightened. "I don't have a choice. Not anymore." Jack's fists clenched, at his sides. "You always had a choice, Sheriff." Before the sheriff could respond, a voice came from behind them. "Jack, what's going on out here?" "Rachel." Jack turned around, watching her approach, her expression concerned but determined. Her eyes flicked between the sheriff and Jack, reading the tension in the air. "Everything all right?" she asked, her tone firm. Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the sheriff. "We're not done talking, but I've got bigger fish to fry. You think about your next move." The sheriff nodded, his face etched with worry. "I will. Just be careful, Jack. This ain't a fight you want to start alone." As the sheriff left, Rachel stepped closer. "What did he want?" Jack looked, had her the truth heavy in his chest. "Briggs isn't just after the farm, Rachel. He's after everything." The tension in the air was thick with danger, as Jack and Rachel stood side by side in the barn, the only light coming from a single bulb hanging above their heads. The stack of papers before them seemed innocent enough at first glance. Contracts, financial records, land acquisitions. But the deeper they looked, the more they uncovered the ugly web that Clayton Briggs had been weaving for years. "Look at this," Rachel said, her voice low but full of disbelief. "It's not just the land. These aren't just business deals. This is money laundering." Jack leaned over her shoulder, scanning the papers. The contracts seemed to be layered. On the surface, they were about land, but beneath it, there were large sums of untraceable money being funneled into offshore accounts, shell companies and hidden investments, all of it connected to Briggs. "They're using the land as a front," Jack muttered, "and whoever owns the land gets buried in this mess." Rachel flipped through more pages, pulling out something that made her stop. "Jack, look at this." It was a list of names, seemingly random at first, but when Jack looked closer, he saw a pattern. It was a list of local officials, business owners, even members of the county commission. Each name was paired with an amount of money, large amounts. Briggs. "Care's bribing the town," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No wonder the sheriff's been so quiet. He's probably on this list." Jack clenched his jaw. "He's either involved or he's afraid to go against them." Rachel shook her head, frustrated. "This goes back farther than we thought. It's not just about the land anymore, Jack. It's about control." Jack stepped back, pacing the Floor. His mind was racing. Control. Briggs didn't just want the farm, he wanted everything. He wanted to monopolize the land, break down the town and profit from the chaos. Jack clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on him. If Briggs succeeded, it wasn't just Maggie's farm that would fall. The entire county would be his playground. "Do you think anyone else in town knows about this?" Jack asked, his voice sharp. Rachel's face darkened. "I don't think so. Briggs's people are too good at hiding things. They've kept this under wraps for years." Suddenly, the sound of a car engine revving broke the silence. Jack's hand instinctively went to the rifle slung across his back. "Stay here," he said to Rachel, moving quickly toward the barn doors. "I'll check it out." But as he stepped outside, he realized that there was no time for stealth. The car was already speeding down the dirt road toward the farm, tires kicking up dust behind it. It was an unmarked black SUV. As the SUV came to a halt in front of the house, Jack's mind raced. He couldn't tell if it was Briggs's men or someone else, but he wasn't about to take chances. He moved quickly, blending into the shadows, and watched from behind the barn as a tall man stepped out of the vehicle. The man was dressed in black, military-grade gear, tactical vest and all. He wasn't one of Briggs's usual henchmen. This man had the look of someone who had seen real combat. Jack's instincts flared. "Who is that?" Rachel's voice came from behind him, and Jack quickly pulled her back into the shadows. "Don't know. But they're not here for a friendly chat." They watched as the man made his way to the farmhouse. Jack's heart skipped a beat when the man's hand went to his ear, as if receiving a communication. The stranger knocked on the door. Maggie answered it, her face wary, but she didn't slam the door in his face. She let him in. The door clicked shut behind them. "Stay here," Jack whispered. "I'm going in." But before Jack could make his move, Rachel grabbed his arm. "Wait, Jack, if that's Briggs's new guy, we need a plan. We can't just rush in there." Jack hesitated, his jaw tight. She was right. Charging in without knowing who they were dealing with could be a death sentence. They waited, silent and still, watching through the barn's wooden slats. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. It felt like the air itself had turned to concrete, heavy and thick. Then suddenly the door to the farmhouse opened again, and the man emerged. Jack's eyes narrowed as he studied him. The stranger walked with purpose, his shoulders squared, his face impassive. He didn't look like someone who would leave without a fight. As the man got back into the SUV, Jack noticed something, a flash of a badge on the man's belt. "Shit," Jack muttered under his breath. "Feds?" Rachel asked, her eyes wide. Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched as the SUV sped off, disappearing down the road. "We need to find out who that was," he said. "If the feds are involved, this whole thing is bigger than we thought." They didn't have time to waste. Jack moved quickly back to the farmhouse, Rachel close behind him. The door was still closed, but the uneasy silence that hung in the air told Jack that something wasn't right. Inside, Maggie was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a letter in her hand. Her face was pale, and Jack could see the tension in her body. "What is it, Maggie?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she handed him the letter. It was from Clayton Briggs. Jack scanned the letter quickly. It was a legal notice, threatening to take the farm through eminent domain. The wording was clean, almost corporate. There was no emotion behind it, just cold, calculated language. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Jack said, his voice thick with anger. "They're moving in, fast." Maggie's eyes welled up with tears. "What do we do now?" Jack stood tall, his gaze hardening. "With determination, we fight. And we take them down." The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the farm. The quiet was suffocating, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. Jack stood by the old barn, staring at the paper in his hand, the legal notice from Clayton Briggs's company. It was a formality, a bureaucratic tool used to bully people into submission, but to Jack it was a declaration of war. "Do you think they'll actually go through with it?" Rachel's voice broke through Jack's thoughts. He looked up at her, his eyes cold with resolve. "They've already made their move. They're trying to force us into a corner, Rachel, and the way they're doing it, they'll stop at nothing." Rachel crossed her arms, frustration clear on her face. "I know, but it's not just about the land anymore. The feds are involved now. We can't just fight this on our own. Jack clenched his fists. We don't have a choice. If we back down, it's over for the farm, for Maggie, for everything. They both knew the truth of it. This wasn't just about taking Maggie's farm anymore. Clayton Briggs and his connections had set their sights on something bigger, something far more dangerous. Jack could feel it in his gut. They were up against a machine, one that would crush anything in its path. Do you think we can get the sheriff to help? Rachel asked. He's seen the paperwork. He knows Briggs is corrupt. Jack shook his head. Wheeler's too deep in with Briggs. I don't think he'll make a move unless forced. We need to go outside the law on this one. Rachel's eyes widened. You mean... Yeah, Jack cut her off. I'm going to use every contact. I've got a few people who owe me favors, military, law enforcement, the works. We need to make this bigger than just the two of us. They both knew what that meant. It meant going to war. It meant playing Briggs's game, but on their terms. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, seeing a text from an old friend, someone he hadn't heard from in years. Need to talk, meet me at the diner in town. Carter. Carter. Jack hadn't spoken to him since his SEAL days. Carter had been a close friend, a brother in arms. If Carter was reaching out, it wasn't for small talk. We'll deal with Briggs later, Jack said, tucking the phone back into his pocket. First, I've got to see a guy who might have information on what's really going on behind the scenes. You stay here. I don't want you getting caught up in this mess. Rachel frowned, a hint of defiance in her eyes. I'm coming with you. Jack looked at her for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Rachel, this is going to get dangerous. I need you to stay safe. She stepped closer, her voice steady. I've been in danger before, Jack. I know how to handle myself, but I'm not letting you do this alone. Jack's resolve softened, but only slightly. All right, but we're doing this my way. The two of them drove to the diner in town in Jack's truck, the ride silent except for the hum of the engine. The small town felt different now, quieter somehow, like it was holding its breath just as much as they were. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that everyone knew something was coming, but no one was brave enough to do anything about it. When they arrived at the diner, the small bell above the door jingled as they walked in. Carter was already seated at a corner booth, his back to the wall, eyes scanning the room. He hadn't changed much since Jack last saw him, still the same tough, no-nonsense guy who could handle a weapon as well as he could handle a conversation. Jack, Carter said, his voice low but firm. He stood as Jack and Rachel approached. It's been a long time. Jack clapped him on the shoulder. Good to see you, Carter. You look good for a guy who's been out of the game. Carter smiled wryly. You know me, I'm always keeping busy. The three of them sat down and Jack wasted no time. What do you know about Clayton Briggs? And why are you reaching out to me? Carter leaned in, lowering his voice. Briggs isn't just after land, Jack. He's in deep with some people you don't want to mess with. I've been tracking his moves for months. His connections run all the way up to federal agents and some powerful people on Capitol Hill. He's playing a long game, and if he gets what he wants, we're all screwed. Jack's gut tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. Carter continued. He's got his hands in everything, real estate, oil, even government contracts, and he's using people like the sheriff to cover his tracks. He's got everyone in his pocket, and now he's using that power to take the farm from your grandmother. Rachel's voice cut through the conversation. So what are you telling us? That we're up against a machine we can't beat? Carter glanced at her, his eyes serious. Not exactly. You've got an advantage, Jack. You've got the training, and more importantly, you've got allies. Jack leaned forward, listening intently. Allies? Carter nodded. I've got people who can help, former military, a few cops on the inside. But it's going to cost. We're going to need resources, information, and a plan. If you're serious about taking down Briggs, we're going to need all the firepower we can get. Jack felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. This was it, the point of no return. Once they committed to this, there was no going back. They were either going to take Briggs down or they were going to lose everything. We're in, Jack said firmly, his voice steady. Carter gave him a grim nod. I figured as much. But be prepared, Jack. This is going to get ugly. You're going to need more than just bullets to win this war. As they left the diner, Jack could feel the tension building in his chest. The battle wasn't just about fighting back anymore. It was about survival, and they were going to have to be smart about it. But with Carter's help, maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The morning after their meeting with Carter, Jack and Rachel sat in the kitchen, going over their plan. The air felt thick with anticipation, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. They were no longer just fighting for Maggie's farm. Now it was a full-scale battle against an empire of corruption. "You ready for this?" Jack asked, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of concern. Rachel looked up at him, her expression resolute. "As ready as I'll ever be. But we need more than just a few good men, Jack. We need strategy, we need intel." Jack nodded. "I agree, Carter's right. This isn't just about hitting Briggs head-on. We need to outsmart him at every turn." Rachel placed a stack of papers on the table. It was a detailed map of the farm, the surrounding area, and key locations where Briggs's men were suspected to be operating. They'd need to gather all the information they could to find weaknesses in Briggs's network. "We need eyes on everything," Rachel said, tapping the map. "Briggs has people everywhere. We need to know who's loyal to him and who's just trying to survive." Jack stared at the map, his mind racing. He wasn't just looking at land. He was looking at a war zone. Each line, each dot on the map, represented a possible battlefront. "We've got Carter's contacts in the military, but we'll need to recruit more people. We need those who know how to operate in the shadows, people who can gather intel, without raising alarms." "Sounds like we're building a resistance," Rachel said, a small smirk crossing her face. "We could use some real muscle, too. You know any strong arms who are ready to throw down?" Jack chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I know a few people, but we'll need more than muscle. We need tech experts, people who can handle surveillance, maybe even hacking if we have to." Rachel's eyes brightened with an idea. "I know someone. A guy who used to work in cybersecurity. He could be the key to finding out what Briggs has been hiding online." Jack nodded. "Perfect. Get him on board. I'll make the calls to the others." The plan was simple in theory. Gather intel, expose Briggs's operations, and then strike. But in practice it would be anything but simple. Jack knew the risks all too well. Going up against Briggs meant taking on not just a local crime syndicate, but a network that reached into the highest echelons of power. Every move they made would have consequences. "I'll handle the tech side," Rachel said, already pulling out her phone. "You get Carter and his people in place." Jack leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. He wasn't used to playing this kind of game. He was used to action, clear targets, clear objectives. But this was different. The game was bigger than just one man. It was an entire system of corruption they were up against. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Carter. "Meet me tonight. We've got a lead on a shipment." This could be it. Jack looked at Rachel, his mind already working through the possibilities. If this was what they thought it could be the break they needed to go on the offensive. "Carter's got a lead," Jack said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "We'll need to move fast. This could be the beginning of the end for Briggs." That night they met Carter at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place was a ghost town, except for the occasional truck that rolled by, carrying crates and supplies that Jack didn't trust for a second. Carter was already there, standing in the shadows. He waved them over as Jack and Rachel approached. "Got something interesting," Carter said, his voice low. "We tracked a shipment coming through town. Supposedly it's just supplies for Briggs's operation. But I'm not buying it. I think this is bigger than just his personal stash." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What's in the shipment?" Carter pulled out a small tablet and showed them a series of photos. The boxes were labeled as industrial supplies, heavy. Machinery, tools and other items meant to look innocuous. But upon closer inspection there were hidden compartments in the crates. "Weaponry," Rachel whispered, her eyes widening. "This isn't just a business deal. Briggs is gearing up for something." "Exactly," Carter said, tapping a few more buttons on the tablet. "We've traced the shipment to a secure location. It's supposed to be delivered tomorrow. I think this is the kind of move that tells us Briggs is planning something big." Jack's fists clenched. This was what they'd been waiting for. The proof that Briggs wasn't just a businessman. He was a criminal mastermind who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. "We need to move in tomorrow," Jack said, his voice filled with determination. "This is our chance to get ahead of him." "We'll need a plan," Rachel said. "We can't just rush in. We have no idea what kind of security they're packing." Carter nodded. "Agreed. We need eyes on the inside. Someone who can get in and out without getting caught." Jack thought for a moment. "I'll handle the outside. You two focus on getting intel inside. Carter, you're with me. We'll move in quiet, take down the guards, and get to the shipment." Rachel's eyes flickered with a mix of apprehension and excitement. "You're really going to do this? Huh? Break into a heavily guarded site, expose Briggs, and hope no one gets killed?" Jack met her gaze. "That's the plan." The next day, Jack, Rachel, and Carter met up early to go over the final details of their plan. The timing was critical. If they failed, it could be the end of their operation, and maybe even their lives. They needed to stay sharp and stay focused. As they geared up, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Taking down Briggs's shipment would be a huge victory, but it would only be one small part of the larger war they were about to wage. The night was thick, with tension as Jack, Rachel, and Carter geared up for the mission. The plan was set, the location identified, and the stakes were higher than ever. If this went wrong, there was no turning back. Briggs had to be stopped, one way or another. Jack stood at the edge of the woods, looking over the secure compound in the distance. It was heavily guarded, with spotlights sweeping over the perimeter and armed men patrolling every corner. It was clear that Briggs wasn't taking any chances. "All right, everyone knows their part?" Jack asked, his voice low and focused. Rachel, adjusting the tactical vest over her jacket, gave a quick nod. "We get in, get the intel, and get out. We'll use the back route to avoid the cameras." Carter checked his equipment one last time, his expression serious. "I've got the blueprints of the place. We'll slip in through the east side, where the security's a bit lighter. We're looking for a warehouse number 7. That's where the shipment's being stored. If we can get to it, we can end this tonight." Jack stared at the compound. There was no turning back now. The operation had to succeed. Too much was riding on it. "We're on a timer," Jack said, checking his watch. "Let's move." They made their way through the dense trees, keeping low, their footsteps barely making a sound on the wet ground. Every inch of the plan was calculated, every moment timed to perfection. But Jack knew better than to rely on luck. Anything could go wrong at any moment, and they had to be ready for anything. As they neared the back fence of the compound, Carter held up his hand, signaling for them to stop. He pointed to the security cameras, their red lights blinking at regular intervals. "We can't let those catch us," Carter whispered. "We'll have to disable them first." Rachel stepped forward. "I've got this." She pulled out a small high-tech device from her bag, a jammer. With a few quick movements, she activated it. The camera's blinking red light turned off. "Good work," Jack muttered, before signaling them to keep moving. They slipped through the gap in the fence and made their way toward the compound's east side. They stayed in the shadows, hearts racing, knowing that every step could lead to disaster. Jack's SEAL training kicked in, every sense heightened as they approached the main building. "Warehouse 7's on the left. We go in fast and clean," Carter said. His voice was a calm whisper, but the tension was evident in his eyes. They rounded the corner, crouching low, and found the side door to Warehouse 7. Carter quickly checked the lock. It was electronic. But that didn't pose a challenge for him. Within seconds, he had it open. Jack pushed the door slightly, peering inside. The warehouse was massive, the interior lit by harsh overhead lights that flickered sporadically. Stacks of crates were piled high, everything from heavy machinery parts to what appeared to be industrial supplies. "We've got to find the shipment," Jack whispered. "It's here somewhere." They moved carefully through the warehouse, trying to stay unnoticed. The sound of distant footsteps echoed through the building as a guard walked past, unaware of their presence. The air inside the warehouse smelled musty, filled with the scent of oil and dust. Jack's heart pounded louder in his chest, but he kept his focus. "Over here," Rachel said softly, pointing to a set of crates near the back of the warehouse. Her flashlight flickered across the labels, nothing too unusual at first glance. But when Jack examined the crates more closely, his breath caught in his throat. The labels were fake. Underneath the false markings were the signatures of weapons manufacturers, the same names that appeared on black market lists Jack had dealt with in the past. "This is it," Jack muttered, his voice tight with realization. "This isn't just a shipment of industrial supplies. It's weapons-grade material." Rachel pulled out her phone and snapped pictures of the crates, documenting everything. "We need to move. We've got what we came for. Let's get out before anyone notices." Just as they turned to leave, a sudden deafening noise erupted from the other side of the warehouse. The door slammed open, and 3 heavily armed guards rushed inside, guns raised. "Shit," Carter hissed under his breath. "They know we're here." Jack's mind went into overdrive. He wasn't about to let them get caught. He dove behind a stack of crates, pulling Rachel and Carter with him. The guards spread out, moving quickly through the warehouse, their footsteps growing louder. "We need a plan, and we need it now," Jack said, his voice low but commanding. Carter's eyes flicked to the fire escape above them. "There's a back exit up there, but we'll have to take out the guards before we can make a run for it." Jack nodded. "Rachel, cover us. Carter, you take the left. I'll take the right." With practiced precision, they split up, each moving to their respective positions. Jack's heart pounded as he aimed for the first guard, carefully calculating his movements. He waited for the right moment, the sound of the guard's boots hitting the concrete. And then, in one swift motion, he moved out from his hiding spot, disarming the guard and taking him to the ground in a single, fluid motion. "Nice work," Carter muttered as he took out the second guard with a clean shot to the neck. But as the third guard rounded the corner, Jack's heart skipped a beat. He was too close. There was no time for finesse. Jack lunged forward, knocking the guard to the ground just as he raised his gun. The guard struggled beneath him, but Jack's training was too much. He restrained the man, holding him down long enough for Carter to tie him up. "Let's move," Jack said, pulling the guard's weapon from his belt. They ran for the fire. "Escape!" Adrenaline pushing them faster. Jack could hear the sound of more footsteps in the distance, but they had no time to waste. They climbed quickly, reaching the roof and then making their way across the compound's narrow rooftops. "Almost there," Rachel said, her breath heavy as she sprinted beside them. Suddenly, Jack heard a shout from below. "They're onto us," he hissed. They reached the edge of the compound and jumped down into the trees below, landing hard but rolling with the impact. They ran as fast as they could, hearts pounding, knowing that Briggs wouldn't let this go easily. As they made their way back to the truck, Jack's mind raced. They had the evidence, they had the weaponry, but now they were officially in the crosshairs of a ruthless criminal empire. "Do you think we've won?" Rachel asked breathlessly, looking over at Jack. Jack's expression hardened. "Not even close." The drive back from the warehouse was tense, the weight of what they had just pulled off heavy in the air between them. They had succeeded in their mission, but Jack knew better than to think it was over. No, this was just the beginning. And now they had painted a target on their backs. As the truck rumbled down the dusty road, Rachel glanced over at Jack, her eyes hard with determination. "So what's the plan now?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of concern. Jack's fingers gripped the steering wheel tight, the exhaustion from the mission creeping into his muscles. "We get this to the authorities, get the word out. The world needs to know about what Briggs is doing, about the weapons he's smuggling in. We've got proof now, this is it," Carter chimed in from the back seat, his eyes darting between Jack and Rachel. "We could take this straight to the news, go public with it. The feds would have to move." Jack nodded. "We need to hit them hard, make it impossible for them to ignore us. But we need to be smart. Briggs has people everywhere, and he won't go down quietly. We've seen how he operates. He won't hesitate to burn everything down to keep his empire intact." "Then we hit him first," Rachel said, her voice colder than Jack had ever heard it. "Let's turn this into a war." Jack took a deep breath, keeping his eyes on the road. He had trained for moments like this, but that was in the military, when the enemy was a clear target, when the battle lines were drawn. This, though, was personal. This was about family. "I'll reach out to the right people, but we have to be careful. One wrong move, and this could all backfire." Just as he finished speaking, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Jack pulled over to the side of the road and checked the message. It was from Maggie. "Jack, I don't want to alarm you, But someone's been asking around about you. People are getting nervous, and it's not just the local sheriff. Be careful." Jack's stomach sank. Maggie had been a rock through all of this, but now she was in danger too. "Shit," Jack muttered, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. "They're coming for us. We need to get back to the farm now." The drive back felt like it took forever, the ticking clock echoing in Jack's mind. Every turn he made felt like it brought them closer to danger. They couldn't go back to the farm until they knew they could secure it. As they approached the farmhouse, Jack saw something that made his blood run cold. There was a car parked out front, black, unmarked, and unfamiliar. "Carter, get the gun!" Jack barked as he hit the brakes. Carter scrambled to grab his weapon from the back seat, and Rachel slipped out of the truck, her eyes scanning the doorway. Surroundings. Jack's mind raced as he parked the truck behind the barn and carefully stepped out, his boots making little noise on the gravel. "We need to find out who that is," Jack whispered to Rachel, his hand resting on the grip of his own sidearm. Rachel nodded, pulling her flashlight from her pocket as they slowly approached the house, keeping to the shadows. They crouched behind the old stone wall by the barn, peeking around it to get a better view of the car. From the corner of his eye, Jack saw a group of men standing by the car. They were tall, broad-shouldered, with the cold, calculating eyes of men who had seen far too much. They were dressed in dark tactical gear, clearly no strangers to violence. "They're Briggs's men," Rachel said quietly, her breath catching in her throat. "What do they want?" Jack clenched his jaw. "It's a warning. They've come. For Maggie." Just then, the door to the farmhouse opened and Maggie stepped out, cane in hand, her back straight as ever, despite the obvious weight of her years. Jack's heart skipped a beat as she walked toward the men. "Maggie, no," Jack whispered, a cold sweat breaking out across his brow. One of the men, a tall figure with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward and said something to Maggie. Jack couldn't hear the words, but he could see the way. Maggie's face hardened in response. She wasn't backing down, not now. She never had. Maggie's voice rang out, sharp and strong. "You tell Briggs I'm not afraid of him. You tell him to leave my land, or we'll see just how far he's willing to go to take it from me." The man chuckled darkly, but his eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this, old woman. We'll make sure of it." With that, the men turned and made their way back to the car, leaving Maggie standing there, her cane tapping the ground in defiance. Jack's heart pounded as he took a step forward, but Rachel grabbed his arm, stopping him. "Not yet," she whispered. "Let them go. We'll deal with this later. Right now, we need to get Maggie somewhere safe." Jack nodded, barely able to contain his anger. He watched as the men climbed into the car and drove off, leaving dust in their wake. When they entered the farmhouse, Maggie was sitting at the kitchen table, her face as calm as ever. But Jack could see the worry in her eyes. "You shouldn't have done that, Maggie," Jack said softly, pulling up a chair next to her. Maggie sighed, shaking her head. "It's my farm, Jack. No one's going to scare me off. Not even that damn Briggs." Jack smiled at her, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not letting you fight this battle alone." The words hung in the air between them, thick with meaning. The war was on now, and there was no turning back. "We need to step up," Rachel said, her voice serious. "We're going to hit Briggs where it hurts. We're not just going to expose him, we're going to bring his whole empire down." Jack looked at her, his mind made up. "We'll take the fight to him. We won't stop until he's gone." The night felt eerily quiet after the confrontation with Briggs's men. Maggie was still sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her. Jack stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit fields, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. They weren't just fighting for a farm anymore, they were fighting for their survival. "Do you think they'll be back?" Rachel asked, breaking the silence. She leaned against the doorframe, her eyes scanning the dimly lit farmhouse. Jack didn't turn to look at her, but he could feel the tension in the air. "They'll be back. It's only a matter of time. But we're not going to sit around waiting for them to make the next move." Carter, who had been pacing in the corner of the room, stopped and turned to Jack. "What's the plan, then? We can't just keep reacting to them. We need to be proactive. We need to hit them before they hit us." Jack exhaled, rubbing his eyes. "We get our hands on the information we need to take down their entire operation. We bring the fight to them, directly to Briggs. Rachel crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. We'll need more than just intel. Briggs has money, muscle, and weapons. We can't take him down with a few pictures and some loose documents. That's where you come in, Jack said, turning to Rachel with a small but determined smile. You've got contacts, people who can help us get inside. We need a plan to infiltrate his operation, find out who he's working with, how deep this goes, and we need it fast. Carter nodded in agreement. If we can hit him in his wallet, it'll hurt him the most. Take away his power base and he'll start scrambling. That's when we go in for the kill. Jack turned back to Maggie, who hadn't said a word since the confrontation. She was watching them quietly, her face a study of resilience. Her eyes flicked from one person to the next, as if weighing their words. I've been running this farm my whole life, Jack, Maggie said softly, breaking the tension. And I won't let anyone take it from me. I know it's dangerous, but I'm not backing down. I won't run. Jack's heart ached. The strength in her voice, despite the years, was something he admired deeply. But this wasn't just about fighting for land. It was about family, and it was about surviving a force much larger than any of them. We won't let them take it, Maggie, Jack said, his voice firm. But we need you to trust us. We can't do this alone. Maggie met his gaze, and for a long moment the room was silent, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then, finally, she nodded. I trust you. Just get them off. My land. The plan was set. They would take the fight to Briggs, and they would do it on their terms, the infiltration. It was just before dawn when Rachel made contact with her old friend, a former hacker turned private investigator named Alan, who had connections deep within Briggs's organization. Alan had a reputation for digging up dirt on anyone who crossed his path, and he had his own reasons for wanting to take down the man who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. We meet at the usual place, Rachel asked into her phone, her voice low. Yeah, Alan's voice crackled through the line. You'll want to bring your A-game. I've got some intel that'll make your blood boil. The usual place was a small rundown cafe in the middle of nowhere, perfect for discreet conversations. Rachel, Jack, and Carter arrived just after sunrise. As they entered, they scanned the room for Alan. He was sitting in a corner booth, his scruffy appearance standing out against the clean-cut patrons in the cafe. Alan had always been a bit of an enigma, with his disheveled look and unfiltered attitude. But when it came to information, he was as sharp as they came. Glad you could make it, Alan greeted them with a sly smile, pushing a stack of papers toward them. Jack didn't waste any time. What have you got for us? Alan leaned in, lowering his voice. Briggs has been running weapons across state lines for years. It's not just firearms. He's dealing in military-grade tech, explosives, and even human trafficking. But here's the kicker. He's got a partner, a shadow player who's been funding his operations. Carter leaned in closer, his brow furrowing. Who's the partner? Alan slid a photo across the table. This is Nathaniel Cross, used to be in the military, high-ranking until he got dishonorably discharged. Now he's Briggs's right-hand man, but he's much worse. He's the muscle, Briggs's puppet master. Rachel picked up the photo, studying it. This guy's the real threat. Jack felt a surge of anger. The operation wasn't just about taking down a few thugs. It was much bigger than that. It was a criminal syndicate with deep connections and the resources to keep everyone in line. All right, so how do we get to him? Jack asked. Alan tapped the papers, giving them a cold smile. I've got the location of Cross's hideout. It's heavily guarded, but you've got the element of surprise. If you hit him hard and fast, you'll catch him off guard. And when you do, it'll disrupt Briggs's whole operation. Jack's mind raced. This was the break they needed, the opportunity to take down the whole network before it could grow any further. But it wasn't going to be easy, it never was. We'll need to move fast, Jack said. No time to waste, let's go. As they left the cafe, the gravity of their mission hit Jack. They were about to enter the heart of Briggs's empire, where every corner was filled with danger. But there was no turning back now. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the barren roads that led to Nathaniel Cross's hideout. Jack's truck rumbled down the desolate path, the engine's growl a constant reminder of the danger ahead. Rachel sat beside him, her fingers tapping anxiously on the dashboard. Carter was in the back seat, silent as ever, his eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced precision. "All right, we're close," Jack said, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. He had been in tight situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't just another mission, this was personal. Rachel turned to him, her expression hard. "We don't have time to second-guess ourselves now. We hit hard, hit fast, get in, get out, no hesitation." Jack nodded. "No hesitation, we make this count." They had been planning this for days, mapping out the terrain, finding weak points, and identifying the security measures around Cross's compound. Alan's intel had given them a fighting chance, but the risks were still massive. Cross wasn't just another criminal, he was ruthless, a man who would stop at nothing to protect his operation. The compound loomed ahead, a fortified warehouse, with high barbed wire fences and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. A few trucks were parked outside, their engines idling, but everything seemed eerily quiet. Too quiet. "We'll split up," Jack said, his voice low and commanding. "Rachel, you'll take the east side, Carter. You're with me on the west. We'll meet at the front entrance once we've neutralized the guards. Don't engage unless necessary. We need to get Cross, not make a scene." Rachel nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Got it. Stay safe." Carter didn't say anything, but he gave a curt nod and clutched his weapon tighter. The three of them moved in sync, each knowing exactly what to do, each moving like shadows as they approached their designated positions. The minutes felt like hours as they crept closer to the compound, their breath steady despite the rising tension. Jack's heart thudded in his chest as he crouched low behind a pile of crates. He scanned the area, taking note of the guards patrolling the perimeter. There were 4 of them, each armed with assault rifles and wearing tactical gear. This wouldn't be easy, but it wasn't impossible. They could take them down quickly and quietly. Rachel's voice crackled through his earpiece. "I'm in position. Ready when you are." "Same here," Carter's voice followed. "Let's move." With a quick signal, Jack surged forward, sprinting across the open space toward the western side of the compound. He was a Navy SEAL, a trained professional, but there was something about this mission that felt different. This wasn't just about tactics and strategy. This was about protecting family. It was about everything that mattered. He reached the guard closest to him, a young man with a helmet obscuring his face. Without a sound, Jack moved behind him, using the element of surprise to his advantage. In one swift motion, he twisted the guard's arm behind his back, bringing him to the ground in a controlled, quiet takedown. The second guard didn't even have time to react before Carter was on him, using a similar technique to subdue him. The two of them worked seamlessly together, dispatching the guards without a single shot fired. Meanwhile, Rachel had taken down 2 more guards on the opposite side, her movements precise and fluid. It was like they were ghosts, unseen, unheard, and deadly. "Clear," Rachel whispered through the earpiece. "Clear," Carter responded, standing up and dusting off his tactical gear. Jack exhaled slowly, his heart still racing. "Let's move, we're almost there." They gathered near the entrance, their weapons drawn and ready. Jack could see the front door of the warehouse, a thick steel barrier that would be their next challenge. But as they approached, the door opened suddenly, and out stepped Nathaniel Cross himself. The man was tall, with sharp features and the kind of presence that demanded respect. His cold, calculating eyes scanned the area, but he didn't seem surprised to see them. In fact, he looked almost amused. "Well, well," Cross said, his voice smooth and mocking. "I wondered how long it would take before you all showed up." Jack's blood ran cold. "We've come to end this, Cross. You and Briggs, you're done." Cross smiled, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "You think you can just waltz in here and take me down? I've been expecting you, Jack. You and your little friends." Before Jack could react, several armed men emerged from the shadows, surrounding them in an instant. The trap had been set, and they had walked right into it. "Drop your weapons," Cross commanded, his voice low but commanding. "Now you've come a long way, but this is where it ends." Jack's mind raced. He had to think fast, had to come up with a way out. His eyes darted around, searching for an opening, a weakness. He wasn't going to let Cross win, not after everything they had fought for. In the split second it took for Cross to turn toward his men, Jack made his move. He dove to the side, rolling behind a stack of crates for cover. Bullets whizzed past him, but he didn't stop. He had one shot at this, and he wasn't about to miss it. "Get down!" Rachel shouted as she fired back, pinning down the men who had surrounded them. Carter followed suit, his shots precise as he kept the gunman distracted. Jack pushed forward, using the chaos to slip closer to Cross. He could see the smug look on the man's face. He wasn't afraid, but he would be. Jack reached the edge of the crates, his gun trained on Cross. "You're not walking out of here." "Cross?" For the first time, Cross's expression faltered. He was out of options. "You won't win this, Jack. Briggs won't let you take me down." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then he'll have to come for me himself." The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he stared down Nathaniel Cross. The gunfight raged around them, bullets ricocheting off the steel walls of the warehouse, but Jack's focus never wavered from his target. Cross's cold eyes met Jack's, his smirk replaced with a grimace of frustration. "You think you've won? You're in my world now, Jack," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but a fly caught in my web." Jack's grip on his weapon tightened. "You're the one trapped, Cross. You don't get it. This ends now." Before Cross could react, Rachel's voice rang out over the chaos. "Jack, move! We've got company!" Jack's instincts kicked in, and he dove to the side just as a hail of bullets tore through the space where he had been standing. He hit the ground hard, rolling behind a stack of crates for cover. His breath came in short bursts, but his mind was clear. They were outnumbered, and they needed to move fast. Carter's voice crackled through his earpiece. "We've got two more on the left side. Rachel's handling the right. We need to push forward and take control of this fight. Are you good to go?" "I'm good," Jack replied, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He could hear the distant rumble of trucks arriving outside the compound, reinforcing the feeling that this was just the beginning. But it didn't matter. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. Rachel's gunfire echoed from the opposite side of the warehouse, forcing the enemy to duck and scramble for cover. It gave Jack the opening he needed. He emerged from behind the crates, moving quickly and quietly, scanning the room for any signs of Cross. The man was a ghost, always one step ahead, always calculating. But Jack knew one thing: Cross wouldn't be able to dodge them forever. He reached the center of the warehouse where Cross had retreated, now standing behind a stack of metal barrels. His men were still holding their positions, but it was clear they were losing ground. "You're not getting away, Cross," Jack shouted. His voice cutting through the noise, Cross's eyes narrowed, and without warning, he fired several rounds in Jack's direction. Jack dove behind a pillar, narrowly avoiding the bullets. He could hear the sound of footsteps closing in from behind him. More guards were coming. They had to end this, and fast. "Carter." "Rachel," Jack called out, his voice urgent. "We need to take Cross down now. We can't let him escape." "On it." Rachel's voice was tight with focus. "I'm moving to flank him. Get ready." Jack peered around the corner of the pillar. He could see Cross's silhouette against the dim lighting of the warehouse, crouched and ready to strike. But Jack knew Cross was starting to make mistakes. He was too desperate. He was trying to escape rather than fighting back with precision, and that would cost him. Suddenly there was a loud bang from across the room. Rachel had taken her shot, knocking down one of Cross's men who had been preparing to ambush Jack. The distraction was enough for Jack to make his move. He sprinted toward the barrels, covering the distance in a few short seconds. As Jack reached the barrels, Cross turned to face him, eyes filled with rage. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Jack. You're in way over your head." "We'll see about that," Jack said, and in a blur of motion he lunged forward, tackling Cross to the ground. The two men struggled, each trying to overpower the other. Jack's military training took over, and he pinned Cross down with a knee to his chest, forcing the gun from his hand. Cross snarled, but Jack was relentless. He twisted Cross's arm behind his back, locking it in a painful hold. "Game's over, Cross," Jack said, breathing heavily. "You're done." But before Jack could finish the job, a loud crack of gunfire rang out, echoing through the warehouse. Jack froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. He could feel a sharp pain in his side as the bullet tore through his vest, grazing his ribs. The impact sent him stumbling back, losing his grip on Cross. Cross took advantage of the momentary confusion. rolling out from under Jack and scrambling to his feet. "You thought you could take me down so easily," he sneered, his hand now reaching for a concealed sidearm. "No?" Jack gritted his teeth, but it was too late. Cross had already drawn the gun and was aiming it directly at Jack's head. Everything seemed to slow down. Jack's mind raced as he reached for his own weapon, but he knew he was too far away. His options were running out fast, but just as Cross's finger began to tighten on the trigger, a sharp, echoing shot rang out from the far side of the warehouse. Cross's body jerked back, his eyes widening in shock. The gun fell from his hand as he crumpled to the floor, dead before he hit the ground. Rachel emerged from the shadows, her sniper rifle smoking in her hands. "One less problem to deal with," she said coldly, her voice as steady as ever. Carter was right behind her, moving toward Jack, his expression tense but relieved. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning Jack's wound. "I'll live," Jack said through gritted teeth, trying to ignore the pain in his side. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. They couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. But as they regrouped, the distant sound of engines revving outside made their blood run cold. "More trucks, more reinforcements." "Brace yourselves," Jack muttered. "Briggs is coming. He knows we've got Cross. This is just the beginning." The rumble of approaching engines grew louder with every passing second. Jack's instincts screamed at him to move, but he couldn't afford to waste time. His side burned with pain from the bullet graze, but he forced himself to stay focused. Rachel and Carter had already assumed defensive positions, scanning the surroundings for any signs of the incoming threat. "We don't have much time," Rachel muttered, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the horizon. "Briggs won't waste any more time sending men after us. We need to prepare for a full-scale assault." Jack nodded, his mind working quickly. They couldn't let their guard down. Not now, not when they were so close. He glanced over at Carter, who was checking his weapon and tightening the straps on his gear. The silent warrior's resolve was evident, his face hard and determined. "We need to make a stand here," Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing outside. "The only way out is through. We'll need to take out as many of Briggs's men as we can and push through to the extraction point." Carter nodded without a word, already moving to fortify their position. Rachel quickly joined him, both of them working in tandem to set up defensive lines. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself as he checked his sidearm and his rifle, making sure they were ready. The trucks were closer now, their headlights cutting through the darkened sky. Jack knew they had no choice but to engage. He could already feel the tension building in the pit of his stomach, but he pushed it aside. Fear wouldn't help them now. "We can do this," Jack said, looking at his teammates. "We've made it this far. We stick together, and we make sure this is the last fight." Rachel gave a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. No turning back now. The first truck roared into view, and Jack could see the armed men spilling out of it, heavily armed and ready for a fight. A dozen men at least, each one holding military-grade weapons. Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. They had the element of surprise, but for how long? "Get ready," Jack whispered, his eyes scanning for the right moment. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, his adrenaline rushing through his veins. The sound of the truck's engines grew deafening as it skidded to a stop. The men poured out, taking up positions around the perimeter of the compound. They had no idea what was waiting for them. "Now!" Jack barked, and in an instant they opened fire. The sound of gunfire filled the air, loud and chaotic, as Rachel and Carter expertly took out two of the men in the first wave. The enemy scattered, diving for cover behind crates and walls, returning fire. Jack's heart raced as he squeezed off shots, each one finding its mark. But there were too many. They needed to hold the line, but it was clear that the odds were rapidly turning against them. "Left side," Carter shouted, his voice tense. "We've got more coming in from the left." Jack's eyes snapped to the left, where more trucks had pulled up, unloading additional soldiers. It was an ambush. They were being boxed in. The familiar feeling of helplessness crept into Jack's chest, but he refused to let it take hold. "Fall back," Jack ordered. "We need to move now." Rachel and Carter didn't hesitate. They ducked behind cover and followed Jack's lead, retreating deeper into the warehouse. The enemy was closing in on them from all sides, and it was only a matter of time before they were trapped. "We can't let them corner us," Rachel said, her breath coming in short bursts as she reloaded her rifle. "We need to create a path out of here." "Agreed," Jack said. "Carter, cover us. Rachel, we're going to take out the trucks. They're our way out." Without waiting for a response, Jack moved quickly, using the crates and pillars as cover as he made his way toward the back of the warehouse. Rachel followed closely behind, her gun drawn, her movements smooth and practiced. The sound of the battle raged around them, but Jack remained focused. The trucks were their only hope of escape. As they approached the rear exit, Jack could hear the sound of footsteps behind them. They were being pursued and fast, but there was no turning back now. They reached the back of the warehouse where the trucks were parked. The drivers and crew were distracted, trying to coordinate their next move. It was the perfect moment. Jack motioned for Rachel to move up, and the two of them silently closed the distance, taking out 2 more guards without a sound. "We're almost there," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. They reached the first truck, and Jack quickly planted explosives on its fuel tank. "This will give us the distraction we need." Rachel nodded, placing her own charges on the second truck. They moved quickly, but just as they were about to, retreat and explosion rang out from the front of the warehouse. The sound was deafening, and the force of it sent them both stumbling. "What the hell?" Jack yelled, his heart racing. He looked around wildly, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly the lights of the warehouse flickered, and a new voice boomed over the chaos. "Enough of this," Briggs's voice rang out, cold and calculated. "I'm done playing games." Jack's stomach sank. Briggs himself had arrived. "Everyone, fall back to the extraction point," Jack shouted to Rachel and Carter. But the moment the order left his mouth, the warehouse doors slammed open, and Briggs stepped inside, flanked by a dozen heavily armed men. The dim glow of the warehouse lights flickered above, casting long shadows across the scene. The air was thick with tension as Jack, Rachel, and Carter stood at the ready, their backs against the cold steel walls of the warehouse. Briggs's footsteps echoed in the silence, growing louder with each passing moment. The heavy doors creaked behind him as his men fanned out, creating a wall of firepower. "Well, well," Briggs's voice rang out, calm and cruel. "Looks like we've reached the end of the line, Jack." Jack's chest tightened as he faced Briggs, his old nemesis, the man who had spent years making his life a living hell. He could see the smug grin on Briggs's face, the confidence that came from knowing he had the upper hand. Jack's grip tightened on his weapon, but he knew they were outgunned, outnumbered. "Your game's over, Briggs," Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You're not getting out of here." Briggs chuckled darkly, his eyes narrowing. "I think you're mistaken, Jack. You see, this isn't about a fight anymore. It's about survival, and I'm the one who controls that." He gestured toward his men. "Get them." The room erupted into chaos as Briggs's men charged forward, but Jack, Rachel, and Carter weren't about to go down without a fight. The trio opened fire, taking out 2 of Briggs's goons in the blink of an eye, but for every man they dropped, 2 more seemed to take their place. "Carter, to the left," Jack shouted, ducking behind a stack of crates to avoid a hail of gunfire. Carter nodded, his face grim. "I'm on it." He moved swiftly, cutting down 2 more enemies with well-placed shots, but even as he did, more reinforcements flooded. "In from every side, we need to get to the truck," Rachel yelled, her voice carrying over the sound of gunfire. "Now!" Jack scanned the room, his mind working in overdrive. They had no choice. They had to push through and make it to the extraction point. But as they moved toward the exit, Briggs's voice rang out, cold and filled with venom. "You're not going anywhere, Jack," Briggs sneered. "This is where it ends for you. I'll make sure of it." Jack's eyes narrowed. He knew that. A voice knew the hatred behind it. But he couldn't afford to get distracted. He had one goal: survival. But as he looked back toward Briggs, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Briggs wasn't alone. Standing behind him was a man Jack hadn't seen in years, a figure he had never expected to cross paths with again. "Is that—" Jack whispered under his breath, his eyes widening in disbelief. The man standing beside Briggs was none other than his father, Nicholas Reese. "Surprised to see me, son?" Nicholas's voice was low, tinged with bitterness. He wore a suit, his expression as cold as ever, but beneath it there was something deeper, something far more dangerous. Jack's heart stopped. The betrayal he had felt all those years ago had been bad enough. But this was something he had never expected. His father had been a part of this. The entire operation. Everything. "Dad," Jack said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Why? Why would you do this?" Nicholas's lips curled into a smirk, his eyes cold and calculating. "You always were too idealistic, Jack. This world isn't black and white. It's about power, control, and I've spent years building something bigger than you could ever imagine." Jack's blood boiled. "You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we stood for." Nicholas shrugged, unfazed. "No, son, I'm just playing the game, the one you never learned to play." The sound of gunfire snapped Jack back to reality. He was losing focus. They needed to move. Now. But his eyes kept darting back to his father, who was standing there like a ghost from his past, the man who had destroyed everything Jack had worked for. "You don't know anything about loyalty, do you?" Jack spat, his voice hoarse with rage. "You've sold your soul, and for what? Power?" Nicholas raised an eyebrow, his expression darkening. "Power is everything, Jack, and I've spent my life building it. You, on the other hand, spent yours chasing empty ideals. Look where that's gotten you." Jack's jaw tightened. He couldn't let his father control him anymore. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. He turned toward Rachel and, "Carter," his expression hard. "We need to end this," Jack said. "Once and for all." Rachel nodded, her eyes focused. "On your mark." The trio took up positions, preparing for the final push. But as they did, Briggs motioned for his men to step back. A new presence entered the warehouse, 2 men in tactical gear, armed and ready for anything. "I think it's time to end this," Briggs said, his grin widening. "But not before I make sure you know just who you're up against." The 2 new figures stepped forward, and Jack's heart dropped into his stomach. One was a familiar face, an old enemy, someone Jack had never expected to see again. "Colton?" Jack's voice cracked as the realization hit him. Colton, the man who had been his closest friend in the military, now stood with Briggs, his face unreadable. Colton gave a small nod. "You should have known, Jack. You were always too blind to see the truth." The air in the warehouse was thick with tension, a heavy silence hanging in the space between Jack and Colton. The old friend turned enemy stood with a cold smirk, his eyes betraying nothing but a deep-seated bitterness. Jack's heart hammered in his chest. His mind was racing. How had it all come to this? Colton, the man he once trusted with his life, was now part of the very thing Jack had fought against. It was a betrayal unlike any other. "Colton, what the hell are you doing?" Jack demanded, his voice tight with fury. "You're working with Briggs? After everything we've been through?" Colton's expression hardened, the smirk fading into a look of indifference. "You never understood, did you, Jack? You never got it. It's all about survival. You can either get with the program or get out of the way." His eyes flicked to Briggs, who stood with his arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle. "You always were the idealist," Colton continued, his voice cold. "That's why you failed. You didn't see the world for what it really is. Power rules, and I'm finally playing the game right." Jack clenched his fists, fighting back the rage that threatened to explode. His best friend, the man he trusted, the one he had bled beside in countless battles, was now a traitor. It didn't make sense, but there was no time to dwell on it. The clock was ticking, and the fight wasn't over. "You don't get to walk away from this, Colton," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "Not after everything you've done. You're coming with me one way or another." Colton's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, Jack saw a flicker of regret. Just a flash, but enough to give him hope. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "You think I'm going anywhere with you, Jack?" Colton scoffed. "You've got it all wrong. I'm not the one who's out of place here. It's you. You're the one who didn't adapt. And now, you're going to pay for it." Before Jack could respond, Briggs's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "Enough of this nonsense," Briggs spat. "It's time to end it. Get them." At his command, the room erupted into action. Colton and Briggs's men advanced, weapons raised. Jack, Rachel, and Carter instantly fell into defensive positions, their eyes scanning the warehouse for any sign of weakness. "We're not giving up," Rachel said. her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She checked her weapon one last time, ready to fight with everything she had. Carter moved quickly, darting from cover to cover as he took out two of Briggs's men, his movements fluid and precise. Rachel wasn't far behind, covering their flank. As she fired off controlled bursts, picking off anyone who dared show themselves. But it wasn't enough. The warehouse was too large, and Briggs had too many men. Jack's heart raced as he fought to keep the pressure on their attackers, but with Colton and Briggs working together, the odds were stacked against them. "Carter, move to the right," Jack shouted, spotting another wave of soldiers flanking. Them. He had to buy them time. They needed to make it to the extraction point, but it seemed farther away with each passing second. The sound of gunfire rang out, deafening and relentless. Jack's mind was a blur, but one thing was crystal clear. They couldn't lose. Not now, not when they were so close. "Jack," Rachel called out, her voice tinged with urgency. "We need to fall back." She was right. They couldn't keep this up forever. Jack glanced at her, and without a word, they began to move toward the back of the warehouse where the extraction point lay. But Briggs and his men were relentless, closing in on them from every angle. "Cover us," Jack shouted at Carter, who immediately opened fire, creating a deadly path that allowed Rachel and Jack to slip past the advancing soldiers. But just as they neared the back of the warehouse, Jack felt a sharp pain shoot through his side. He staggered, his breath catching in his throat as he dropped to one knee. A bullet had grazed him, and the pain was overwhelming. "Jack," Rachel cried, her eyes wide with concern as she rushed to his side. "You're hit." "I'm fine." Jack gritted through his teeth, though his vision was starting to blur. He forced himself back to his feet, pushing through the pain. "We have to keep going. We don't have much time." Behind them, Briggs's laughter echoed through the warehouse. "You're not going anywhere, Jack," Briggs taunted. "You're mine now, you and your little team." But before Jack could respond, the sound of a truck engine roared to life outside, followed by the screech of tires on gravel. The extraction point, was it finally here? "No way," Jack muttered under his breath, his heart racing. He turned to Rachel. "Get to the truck, now." The three of them sprinted toward the rear exit of the warehouse, the sound of gunfire still ringing in their ears. As they reached the back, they could see the silhouette of the truck parked just outside. It was their ticket out of here. Just as they made it to the door, a shadow moved in front of them, a figure in black tactical gear blocking their escape. "Not so fast," Colton's voice called out from the darkness. He stepped into the dim light, his gun raised and aimed directly at Jack. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment he had feared had finally come. Colton was standing between them and freedom, his loyalty to Briggs undeniable. "Colton," Jack said, his voice low and steady despite the pounding in his chest. "This isn't you. You don't have to do this." Colton hesitated, his gaze flickering for a brief moment, but then he hardened, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I'm sorry, Jack, but this is the only way." The warehouse was a war zone. The air was thick with smoke, the sounds of gunfire and the crackle of electricity from damaged wires. Jack could barely focus, but there was one thing he knew for sure. He had to get out of there. No matter the cost. In front of him stood Colton, the man who had once been his closest friend. The betrayal stung like 100 needles, but there was no room for weakness. Jack's chest heaved with each breath, the pain from his side still sharp, but it wasn't going to stop him. Colton stood with his gun aimed at Jack, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. It was just the two of them facing each other in a storm of emotions and gunfire. "Colton, please," Jack said, his voice low and pained. "You don't have to do this. You know who Briggs really is. You know what he's done?" Colton's jaw clenched, his eyes flickering with a hint of doubt, but he didn't lower his weapon. "You don't understand, Jack. It's not about right or wrong. It's about power, survival. You're living in a fantasy." "No," Jack said firmly, shaking his head. "It's about loyalty, honor. You've lost that, Colton, and you're not the man I thought you were." For a heartbeat, Colton faltered, his hand trembling ever so slightly. Jack saw it. The crack in his armor. Colton was struggling, but it wasn't enough. He wasn't going to let Jack get through to him. Not this time. "You're wrong," Colton whispered, his voice tight with emotion. "You left me. You chose your ideals over your family, over your own brother." Jack's heart dropped into his stomach. It was as if Colton had slapped him across the face. The words hit too close to home, but Jack couldn't let that stop him. He had to keep going. For Rachel, for Carter, for his grandmother. "Colton, listen to me," Jack shouted, stepping forward. "Briggs is using you. He's using all of us. You don't want this. You can still walk away." Colton's finger twitched on the trigger. The weight of their history hung in the air between them. But just as it seemed like Colton would pull the trigger, a loud noise rang out, an explosion that shook the entire building. It wasn't just any explosion. It was a controlled detonation, the sound of a vehicle bomb going off outside. The blast was so strong, the shockwave knocked them all off their feet. Jack hit the ground hard, his head spinning, but there was no time to lose. "Get to the truck!" Rachel screamed, her voice barely audible over the ringing in Jack's ears. The blast had thrown everyone into chaos. The building shook as debris rained down from the ceiling. For a moment, Jack thought it was over. But then, through the haze, he saw it, a figure sprinting toward them. It was Carter, waving frantically for them to follow. "Move, now!" Carter yelled, his voice urgent. "I've got the truck, but we've got to go now!" Jack didn't hesitate. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the sharp pain in his side as he ran toward Carter. But just as he was about to make it to the exit, he heard Colton's voice one last time, low and filled with regret. "Jack!" Colton called, his voice shaking. Jack turned to face him, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm sorry." Jack's mind raced. He wanted to believe that Colton was telling the truth, but there was no time to figure it out. He had to move. But just before he could take another step, Colton lowered his weapon. The sound of an engine revving cut through the chaos as Carter's truck barreled down the makeshift escape route. Jack made a snap decision. "We'll talk later," Jack said to Colton, his voice fierce. "But right now we're leaving, and you're not going to stop us." Colton didn't respond. Instead, he watched silently as Jack, Rachel, and Carter rushed toward the truck. Jack's hand brushed against the side of the door as they climbed in, the dust and debris swirling in the air behind them. Before they could get fully inside, a figure emerged from the wreckage. It was Briggs. "Not so fast," Briggs sneered, raising his weapon. But just as he was about to fire, a shot rang out, sharp and clear. Briggs staggered backward, a look of shock on his face as he dropped to the ground. Standing just behind Briggs was Nicholas Reese, Jack's father, who had appeared out of nowhere, his gun still smoking. "You're done, Briggs," Nicholas said, coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. "The game is over." For a moment the world seemed to freeze. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. His father, the man who had turned his back on everything Jack stood for, had just saved him. "You—" Jack started, his voice thick with disbelief. "You're here." Nicholas didn't answer at first. Instead, he just nodded, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "I've made mistakes, Jack, but this is where I draw the line." With Briggs down, the chaos seemed to subside for a moment. The sounds of battle were still echoing in the distance, but they had won this small victory. Carter slammed the truck into gear, the engine roaring as they sped off into the night. The storm had passed, but the scars would remain. Jack looked over at his grandmother's farm in the distance, the place he had fought so hard to protect. "This isn't over," Jack said, his voice firm, "but we'll make sure it ends on our terms." The truck sped off into the night, the weight of everything still heavy on their shoulders, but they were free. For now. Epilogue. Months later, life had settled. The farm, once under threat, was now safe, thanks to Jack's determination, his team, and the surprising ally that was his father. Colton was gone, but Jack still held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find redemption. As for Briggs, he was out of the picture. His empire crumbled under the weight of his own greed. Jack sat on the porch of his grandmother's farmhouse, the sun setting on the horizon. He looked down at the old watch his grandfather had given him, a reminder of everything he had fought for. The battle was over, but the journey had just begun. And Jack knew that as long as his family was safe, that was all that mattered. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?